An injured stallion leads a mountain man to a hidden cabin, and what he found inside left him speechless. Snow whips through the high peaks. A rifle clicks. Hooves pound weakly against frozen earth. A weathered loner follows the bleeding tracks, expecting death at the end of the trail. But when the stallion collapses at a cabin door, the door creaks open, and inside stands a desperate widow with a dying boy at her side. She's hiding more than sorrow. A secret deed. A spring that could water an entire valley. And dangerous. Men who'll burn everything to steal it. The mountain man never planned to take sides, but now faith, family, and survival hang in the balance. The church bell tolls. The deputy's badge glints in firelight. And the stallion once broken rises again. What will this loner risk when justice collides with greed? And can one hidden cabin change the course of 3 lives forever? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now. And if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The wind whistled through the narrow canyon, carrying snowflakes that danced in the fading light. Jerry Boone kept his eyes fixed on the black stallion's labored movements, noting how the proud creature stumbled forward despite its injury. Blood drops stained the pristine snow, leaving a trail that worried the experienced mountain man. "Easy. There, boy," Jerry murmured, his breath visible in the cold air. His pack mule snorted behind him, hooves crunching through the fresh powder. The canyon walls rose steep and jagged on both sides, creating shadows that deepened with the approaching dusk. Jerry had roamed these mountains for nigh on 15 years, but this hidden passage was unfamiliar territory. His weathered hand gripped, his rifle tighter, ready for whatever might emerge from the thickening snowfall. The stallion's dark form moved like a ghost through the white curtain ahead, drawing him deeper into the unknown. The canyon suddenly opened into a small clearing, where ancient pines stood guard around a rough-hewn cabin. Smoke curled from a stone chimney, carrying the sweet scent of burning pine. The black stallion finally collapsed near the cabin's door, its sides heaving with exhaustion. Before Jerry could take another step, the cabin door creaked open. Light spilled onto the snow, and in its glow stood a Cherokee woman, her black hair streaked with silver, a shotgun held steady in her hands. Behind her, a teenage boy peered out, his thin face marked by worry and illness. "That's far enough," the woman called out, her voice strong despite the fear Jerry could see in her eyes. "State your business." Jerry slowly lowered his rifle, making his movements deliberate and calm. "Name's Jerry Boone, ma'am. I followed your injured horse, thinking it might need putting down." He gestured toward the stallion. "Didn't expect to find anyone living up here." The woman's eyes narrowed, studying him with the wariness of someone who'd learned the hard way not to trust strangers. The boy coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made Jerry wince in sympathy. "I'm Ada Snowbird," she finally said, though her shotgun remained aimed. "This is my son, Nathaniel." Her voice carried pride despite their circumstances. "The stallion's been visiting our clearing for months. We've been leaving feed for him." Jerry nodded, understanding growing in his mind. This hidden canyon was a sanctuary, not just for the wild horse, but for this mother and son who seemed to be surviving alone in the wilderness. The boy's sickly appearance and the woman's defensive stance told a story of hardship and determination. "If you allow it," Jerry said carefully, "I've some skill with treating horse injuries. Might be able to help your four-legged friend there." He kept his hands visible, aware that trust was as fragile as spring ice in these mountains. Ada's shotgun lowered slightly as she glanced at the suffering stallion. Nathaniel touched his mother's arm, his eyes bright with hope. "Ma, please. The horse needs help." The wind gusted stronger, bringing more snow and a deeper chill. Jerry waited patiently, knowing that rushing trust could spook both horse and humans. After what seemed like ages, Ada lowered her shotgun completely. "You can tend to the horse," she said firmly. "But keep your rifle slung." Her eyes met Jerry's, dark with determination. "We've had our fill of men who claim good intentions." Jerry carefully secured his rifle across his back, then reached for his pack mule's supplies. "Much obliged, Mrs. Snowbird. I'll need some hot water, if you can spare it." Nathaniel hurried inside despite his obvious weakness, eager to help. Ada remained in the doorway, watching Jerry's every move as he approached the injured stallion. The horse's wild eyes rolled with fear, but exhaustion kept it from fleeing Dot as Jerry knelt in the snow beside the magnificent animal. He could feel the weight of Ada's gaze. This chance encounter, led by a wounded horse through unknown territory, had brought him face to face with something he never expected to find in his solitary mountain life: a family in need. Hidden away from the world, carrying secrets as deep as the canyon that sheltered them. The snow continued to fall as Jerry began his work, each flake adding another layer to the wild tale of how a reclusive mountain man found himself drawn into the lives of Ada Snowbird and her son, all because he chose to follow an injured stallion's trail through the gathering dusk. Inside the cabin, the lamplight cast flickering shadows on rough-hewn walls. Jerry stood near the door, his eyes adjusting to the dim interior. The single room held simple furnishings: a wooden table, 2 chairs, and beds tucked against the far wall. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, filling the air with an earthy scent. A harsh cough broke the silence. Nathaniel doubled over on his bed, pressing a worn rag to his mouth. When he pulled it away, Jerry caught the dark stain of blood. His heart clenched at the sight, memories of his own lost family rising unbidden. Ada moved swiftly to her son's side, reaching for a clay jar on the shelf above his bed. "Here, drink this," she murmured, mixing herbs into a cup of steaming water. Her hands were steady, but Jerry could see the worry etched in the lines around her eyes. "You've seen enough," Ada said sharply, turning to face Jerry. "We appreciate the help with the horse, but you need to go." Her voice was firm, though exhaustion threaded through her words. Jerry reached slowly into his pack. "I understand your caution, ma'am, but before I leave, please accept this." He withdrew a wrapped package of venison, the meat still fresh from his morning hunt. "It's good protein for the boy." Ada's expression flickered between suspicion and need. Nathaniel coughed again, softer this time, but the sound still rattled in his chest. "I live about 3 miles northeast of here," Jerry continued quietly. "Lost my wife Sarah and our little girl to fever 8 years back. Been keeping to myself since then." He placed the venison on the table, careful to maintain his distance. "I know what it's like, wanting to protect what's precious." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire and Nathaniel's labored breathing. Finally, Ada's shoulders relaxed slightly. "The horse needs tending," she said. "You can stay long enough for that." Jerry nodded, gathering his medical supplies. Outside, the black stallion lay where they'd left it, snow gathering on its sleek coat. Jerry approached slowly, speaking in low tones. The horse's dark eyes watched him, but it didn't struggle when he began cleaning the deep gash on its flank. Ada stood in the doorway, shotgun now leaning against the frame, but still within reach. She watched as Jerry's experienced hands worked, washing the wound with boiled water and binding it with clean cloth. "You've done this before," she observed. "Many times," Jerry replied, not looking up from his work. "Horses are proud creatures. They hide their hurts until they can't anymore." He secured the last bandage. "Like some people I know." Back inside, Ada served a modest meal of cornbread and beans. The three sat at the small table, lamplight casting warm circles on the worn wood. Jerry noticed how Ada made sure Nathaniel ate first, pushing her own portion to the side. "I'm going to get better, Ma," Nathaniel insisted between bites, his thin face determined. "By spring, I'll be strong enough to help with the garden again. Ada touched his shoulder gently, her love for her son clear in every gesture. Jerry saw both strength and fear in her eyes, the same look he'd seen in Sarah's face during their daughter's illness. The wind howled outside, rattling the cabin's shutters. Jerry stood, brushing crumbs from his coat. I should check the storm. Outside, the snow fell heavily, transforming the clearing into a white wilderness. The injured stallion had found shelter under the cabin's small lean-to, its breath creating clouds in the cold air. Jerry studied the tracks that had led him here, already filling with fresh snow. A strange feeling settled over him as he stood in the swirling white. The horse could have collapsed anywhere in these mountains, yet it had brought him straight to this hidden cabin, to a widow and her sick son, struggling alone. It seemed too perfect to be mere chance. The Lord works in mysterious ways, his Sarah used to say. Perhaps she'd been right all along. Jerry's hand rested on the cabin's rough door. The warmth of the fire beckoned through the cracks, along with the soft murmur of Ida's voice as she spoke to her son. He should leave, return to his solitary existence in his own cabin. That would be the sensible thing to do. But he lingered, caught between the familiar pull of his lonely life and something new stirring in his heart. The storm raged around him as he stood there, unable to take that final step away from the door. Morning sunlight glinted off fresh snow as Jerry stood in Ada's clearing, axe rising and falling in steady rhythm. Each stroke sent wooden chips flying, the sharp crack of splitting logs echoing through the crisp air. He'd started at dawn, wanting to leave Ada's woodpile well stocked before heading home. The injured stallion watched from its shelter, steam rising from its nostrils. Its wound looked cleaner this morning, though the animal still favored its injured leg. Ada appeared in the doorway, a tin cup of coffee in her hands. You didn't have to do this, she said, but relief showed in her eyes as she surveyed the growing stack of firewood. Least I could do, Jerry replied, setting another log on the splitting stump. Storms left plenty of deadfall. Inside, Nathaniel slept fitfully, his breathing labored but steady. Jerry gathered his gear, nodded his goodbye, and started the trek home through knee-deep snow. He made it halfway before stopping dead in his tracks. The image of Ada's dwindling woodpile haunted him, along with Nathaniel's thin frame huddled under warm blankets. The boy wouldn't last winter without proper heat, and Ada couldn't manage alone, not with a sick child to tend. Dadgum conscience, Jerry muttered, turning back. He'd stored extra kindling in his cabin's lean-to, and those rabbit snares weren't doing him any good gathering dust. The sun hung low when Jerry returned, his pack heavy with supplies. Ada's surprise showed plain on her face when she opened the door. Thought you'd gone, she said, stepping aside to let him in. Reckon I did too. Jerry set down his pack. Brought some things might help. Ada's eyes widened at the sight of the kindling and snares. Her fingers traced the well-made wile loops. These could keep us in meat through winter, she said softly. That's the idea. Jerry hung the snares by the door. If you'll permit, I can show you where to set them tomorrow. They shared a simple supper of cornmeal mush and the last of yesterday's venison. As they ate, Ada's shoulders gradually loosened, and she began to speak. Thomas, my husband, he worked for the railroad first as a surveyor, then as a land agent. Her voice grew distant with memory. He saw how they treated Cherokee families, forcing them from their homes. He couldn't stomach it anymore. Jerry listened quietly, noting how she gripped her spoon tighter. He found this valley, filed a proper claim through official channels. Said we'd build something honest here. Ida's eyes darkened. 3 months. After we settled, Thomas took sick. Fever took him in 2 days. I'm sorry, Jerry said softly. Railroad men came 2 weeks after we buried him. Demanded the claim papers, said Thomas had sworn the land to them. Ada's jaw clenched. I knew they were lying. Thomas would never. She broke off as Nathaniel stirred restlessly in his bed. Jerry followed her gaze to the small spring-fed stream visible through the window. Valley water, he said slowly. With the right irrigation, it could green up hundreds of acres. Ada nodded grimly. Railroad's been buying up every water source they can find. Or taking them when buying doesn't work. Nathaniel's cough interrupted. Them worse than before. Ada hurried to his side, feeling his forehead. He's burning up. Jerry was already heading for the door. I'll get snow to cool him down. Outside, he filled a bucket with fresh snow, his mind churning. He'd heard tales of the railroad's expansion, how they'd run smaller ranchers off their land. But threatening a widow and her sick child, that struck deep at his sense of right and wrong. Back inside, Ada pressed snow-filled claws to Nathaniel's forehead while Jerry stoked the fire. The boy's breathing came in shallow gasps, his face flushed with fever dot as darkness fell. Jerry found himself doing something he hadn't done in years, praying. Not out loud, just quiet words in his heart, asking for guidance, for strength, for wisdom to know the right path. The injured stallion nickered softly from its shelter, as if sensing his thoughts. Jerry moved to the window, watching the proud animal lift its head despite its pain. Something about its quiet determination, its refusal to give up, settled Jerry's mind. He couldn't walk away. Not this time. Not from this dot. Ada stood beside him, her face drawn with worry for Nathaniel. You don't have to stay, she said quietly. This isn't your fight. Jerry watched the stallion stamp restlessly in its shelter, stronger than it had been. Yesterday. Maybe it is now, he replied. Maybe that's exactly why that horse led me here. Dawn painted the mountain peaks in soft rose and gold as Jerry shouldered his empty pack. The morning air bit sharp and clean, promising more snow before nightfall. He'd need to hurry if he wanted to gather supplies and return before the weather turned. I'll be back before sundown, he told Ada, who stood in the doorway wrapped in a worn shawl. Keep that fire stoked. She nodded, her dark eyes watchful. Be careful. These mountains hide many dangers. The trek to his cabin took longer than usual, the fresh snow dragging at his boots. Jerry's thoughts kept drifting back to the small family he'd left behind. The sight of Nathaniel's thin face, Ada's fierce determination to protect what was hers. It stirred something in him he'd thought long buried. His own cabin stood silent and cold, exactly as he'd left it. Jerry moved quickly, gathering what they'd need. 2 sacks of flour, dried beans, extra blankets he'd stored away years ago. His hands lingered on the soft wool. Sarah had picked these out before the fever took her and their little girl. Stepping outside with his loaded pack, Jerry froze. Fresh boot prints marked the snow near his cabin wall. Too big to be his own. Strangers had been here, and recently. The tracks led toward the valley before disappearing into the trees. His heart quickened. If they'd found his cabin, they might find Ada's. Jerry set off at a near run, his heavy pack bouncing against his back. The sun had climbed past noon when Jerry reached Ada's clearing. She opened the door before he could knock, relief flooding her features though she tried to hide. It saw some tracks, Jerry said without preamble, setting down his pack. Strangers heading this way. Ada's hand tightened on the doorframe. How many? Can't be sure. At least 2, by the spacing. Jerry pulled out the supplies. Brought what I could carry. Reckon we should see to that roof before the weather turns. They worked through the afternoon, Jerry showing Ada how to replace the worn shingles with fresh-cut pine. The work was steady but demanding, requiring both strength and precision. Mind that nail, Jerry called from above. Gotta drive it straight or it'll leak worse than before. From his bed by the fire, Nathaniel watched their progress with bright, interest. His cough had eased somewhat, though fever still colored his cheeks. "You're doing it all wrong, Mr. Boone," the boy teased weakly when Jerry fumbled a shingle. "Ma says even a rabbit could build better than that." "Your ma's probably right," Jerry chuckled, grateful to hear the boy's spirit returning. "Good thing. She's here to keep me straight." Ada glanced up at Jerry's self-deprecating humor, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. As the day wore on, she noticed how he favored his right shoulder, evidence of hours of hard labor. When dusk approached and the roof was finally sealed, Ada gestured to a corner near the hearth. "There's space enough there, if you're wanting to rest a spell." Jerry nodded gratefully, understanding the offer for what it was, not just a place by the fire, but a measure of trust. Ada stirred a pot of venison stew, the rich aroma filling the small cabin. They ate in comfortable silence, interrupted only by the pop and crackle of burning wood. "The deed papers," Ada said suddenly, her voice low. "I keep them safe." She crossed to a shelf and pulled down a well-worn Bible. "Thomas said to guard them with my life. Said they're our future." Jerry watched her handle the book with reverence. That's wise thinking, though. He hesitated, not wanting to dim her hope, but needing to be honest. Law folks hereabouts, they don't always look kindly on Indian claims, even proper ones. Ada's chin lifted, pride straightening her spine. Thomas earned this land honest. Paid for it in sweat and silver. Did everything by their law, their way. Her eyes flashed. "I won't let them steal what he built for us," for Nathaniel. Jerry nodded slowly, respect deepening for this woman who faced impossible odds with such dignity. "No," he said quietly. "We won't let them." The fire cast dancing shadows on the cabin walls as they settled in for the night. Jerry spread his blankets in the offered corner, his body aching from the day's work, but his mind oddly at peace. Outside, snow began to fall again, but the newly mended roof held strong against the growing storm. Morning arrived with a heavy blanket of snow. Jerry stood at the cabin's single window, watching white flakes swirl against the glass. The storm had sealed them in as surely as if someone had barred the door. "Reckon we're not going anywhere today," he said, turning back to the cabin's interior where Ada stirred a pot of morning porridge. She nodded, her eyes on Nathaniel's sleeping form. "The snow will help his breathing, at least. Cold air often does." Jerry settled at the rough-hewn table, spreading out his collection of damaged snares. The wire loops needed mending, and his fingers welcomed the familiar work. The cabin filled with quiet sounds. The scratch of odor grinding dried herbs with a stone mortar. The soft pop of the fire, Nathaniel's labored breathing. "My Sarah," Jerry said suddenly, surprising himself. His hands kept moving over the snares, but his eyes grew distant. She loved mornings like this. Said the snow made the whole world clean again. Ada's hands stilled on the mortar. She didn't speak, but her silence was attentive. "Lost her and our boy, Thomas, to fever. 8 years past now." Jerry's voice roughened. Thomas was just 5, barely old enough to ride his first pony. The grinding resumed, gentler now. "The fever took many that year," Ada said softly. "Our people lost many little ones, too." Jerry nodded, throat tight. He hadn't spoken of them in so long. The words felt strange on his tongue, like coins long buried now brought to light. "After, I couldn't bear to stay at the ranch. Too many memories. In every corner. Sold everything but my gear and headed for the high country." His fingers worked the wire with practiced ease. "Figured if I kept to myself, nothing could hurt that bad again." Ada moved to the fire, adding herbs to a pot of steeping tea. "Grief is a hard teacher," she said. "It shows us how deeply we can love, even as it takes that love away." "Your husband?" Jerry ventured carefully. "How long ago?" Ada's shoulders stiffened, but she answered. 2 winters passed, They called it an accident at the railroad camp. Her voice turned bitter, but Thomas knew too much. He'd seen their papers, their true plans for this land. The brake line on his wagon was cut clean through. Jerry's hands stilled on his work. You're certain? Thomas checked his wagon every morning. He was careful that way. Ada poured the medicinal tea into a cup, her movements precise. The railroad man came 3 days after we buried him, demanding the deed papers. Said they'd pay fair price. Her laugh held no humor, as if they knew the meaning of fair. Nathaniel stirred then, coughing. Ada hurried to him with the tea, helping him sit up. Jerry watched as she tenderly wiped sweat from the boy's brow, murmuring soft words in Cherokee. The day crept by slowly. Jerry finished the snares and moved on to other small repairs around the cabin. As evening approached, he pulled out his whittling knife and a piece of pine he'd been saving. The wood was clean and straight-grained, perfect for carving. Nathaniel watched from his bed, interest brightening his fever-glazed eyes as Jerry's knife shaped the wood. Gradually, a small horse emerged, not fancy, but with alert ears and a flowing mane. There now, Jerry said, smoothing the last touches with his knife. Reckon he needs a good home. He handed the carving to Nathaniel, whose thin fingers closed around it reverently. He's perfect, the boy whispered, tracing the horse's lines. Thank you, Mr. Boone. Ada stood in the shadows, watching. Something shifted in her expression, a softening around her eyes, a gentle curve replacing her usual stern line of mouth. Outside, the black stallion's weak neigh drew Jerry to the door. He checked the animal's wound by lantern light, pleased to see healthy pink flesh beginning to knit together. He's healing clean, Jerry reported, stamping snow from his boots as he came back inside. Another week of rest. He'll be right as rain. Ada nodded, relief visible on her face. She had grown fond of the proud creature that had led Jerry to their door. Snow pelted the cabin roof in waves, driven by the mountain wind. The sound should have been lonely, Jerry thought, but somehow it wasn't. Not with the fire crackling warm, and Nathaniel cradling his wooden horse, and Ada's quiet presence as she worked on mending by lamplight. He settled into his corner, watching shadows dance across the log walls. The grief he'd carried so long felt different now, shared with someone who understood its weight. Not lighter, exactly, but less solitary. Through the window, snow continued to fall, sealing them in their small sanctuary of warmth and tentative trust. Morning painted the snow-covered, clearing in shades of pearl and gold. Jerry stood at the cabin door, his weathered face creased with worry as he studied the pristine white blanket, except for 2 clear sets of horse tracks that curved past the edge of the clearing, not 50 yards from where they slept. Riders, he muttered, crouching to examine the hoofprints more closely. 2 of them passed through in the night. Ada appeared at his shoulder, her shawl pulled tight against the dawn chill. Railroad men? Could be scouts. Jerry straightened, brushing snow from his knees. Best to know if that stallion can carry weight, in case we need him. He made his way to the lean-to, where the black horse stood. The animal's wound had improved greatly over the past days, pink flesh knitting together clean and strong. Jerry ran, his hands over the horse's flanks, checking for heat or swelling, then carefully settled the saddle on its back. The stallion's ears flicked forward with interest, and it accepted the bit without protest. Jerry led it into the clearing, then swung himself up, testing the horse's reaction to weight. The animal moved cautiously at first, but soon found its stride, picking its way through the snow with growing confidence. Jerry didn't ride far, just enough to gauge the horse's strength. Every moment away from the cabin set his nerves on edge. He returned quickly, relief washing over him at the sight of smoke still rising steady from the chimney inside. He found Ada helping Nathaniel sit up in bed. The boy's cough sounded wet and deep, and Jerry's worry deepened. Ada, he said quietly, drawing her aside. "If strangers come, keep 'em quiet as you can. That cough carries far in cold air." She nodded, her face grim. "I have willow bark steeping. It helps some." They spent the day in careful preparation. Jerry brought in extra firewood, stacking it high along the wall where it would stay dry. Ada hung strips of venison near the hearth to dry, while Jerry checked their supply of lamp oil and turned the wicks low to conserve what remained in the afternoon. Jerry sat with Nathaniel, showing him how to whittle a simple trap trigger from a supple willow twig. The boy's thin fingers were surprisingly nimble as they worked the wood. "Like this?" Nathaniel asked, shaving careful curls from the stick. "That's the way," Jerry encouraged. "Steady and slow wins the race." His heart warmed at the sight of the boy's proud smile, the first real one he'd seen in days. As evening settled in, Ada brewed coffee in a battered tin pot. The rich aroma filled the cabin, mixing with wood smoke and the sharp scent of her healing herbs. She poured 2 cups, offering one to Jerry where he sat by the fire. They drank in comfortable silence until Ada spoke. "Why did you come back?" she asked softly. "That first day, after you left, you could have kept walking." Jerry stared into his cup, considering. The question had waited on his own mind these past days. "Reckon I didn't have much choice," he said finally. "Not really." Ada's eyebrow lifted. "There's always choice." "Maybe so." Jerry shifted, searching for words. "But that stallion, he wasn't running blind when he was hurt. He led me straight here, sure as if he knew the way." "And when?" "I tried to leave." He shook his head. "Felt like someone was tugging on my coat, turning me around." "Someone?" Ada's voice was gentle. "The Lord, maybe." Jerry's voice roughened. "Hadn't thought much about him since Sarah and Thomas died. Figured he'd forgotten about me. Way up here in the mountains. But now," he gestured at the cabin, at Nathaniel sleeping peaceful in the corner, at Ada's quiet presence across the hearth. "Can't help feeling I was meant to find you folks." Ada nodded slowly, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "The old ones say God sends answers in unexpected ways," she said. "Through a wounded horse, through a stranger's kindness. We just have to learn to see them." Jerry sat silent, letting her words sink deep. The fire crackled, throwing shadows on the log walls. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and steady. But the tracks that had worried him that morning were already filled in, erased by fresh white powder. He thought of Sarah then, how she used to say everything happened for a purpose, even the hard things. For the first time in years, that memory didn't bring only pain. Looking at Ada's strong, gentle face across the fire, Jerry felt something long dormant stirring in his heart, not just faith returning, but hope. The morning dawned clear and bright, the storm finally breaking after days of relentless snow. Jerry stood at the cabin door, watching sunlight sparkle across the pristine drifts. The weather window wouldn't last long. Perfect timing to fetch supplies from his place. "I'll ride down to my cabin," he told Ada, buckling his gun belt. "We're running low on flour, and I've got tools we might need." Ada nodded, her hands busy grinding herbs for Nathaniel's morning tea. "Be careful," she said softly. "The railroad men know these trails too." The black stallion had healed well, barely favoring its leg as Jerry mounted. The animal seemed eager to move, prancing a bit before settling into a steady pace through the deep snow. Jerry kept alert, scanning for tracks or movement, but the valley lay silent under its white blanket. An hour's careful riding brought him to his own small clearing. At first glance, nothing seemed amiss, but then he noticed his cabin door hanging crooked on one hinge. His heart hammered as he dismounted, drawing his rifle. The door had been smashed inward, splinters of wood scattered across the threshold. Inside, chaos greeted him. His few possessions lay strewn about, flour sacks slashed open, their contents dumped across the floor. The bed had been overturned, his trunk ransacked. Savages, Jerry muttered, not meaning Indians, but the kind of men who destroy another's home just to send a message. His gaze caught on something pinned to the wall, a piece of paper held by his own skinning knife driven deep into the logs. He yanked the knife free, reading the crude scrawl, "Leave the Indian woman be." Rage burned in his chest, hot enough too. Melt snow. These men hadn't just threatened him. They'd violated the sanctuary of his home, the quiet place he built after losing Sarah and Thomas. He crumpled the note in his fist, working quickly. Jerry salvaged what he could. Some food remained in his root cellar, and he found his toolbox untouched behind fallen shelving. He loaded everything useful onto the Stallion, including extra ammunition, and his spare blankets. The ride back seemed longer, worry spurring him to check over his shoulder often. Relief flooded through him at the sight of smoke still rising from Ada's chimney. She met him at the door, her expression darkening as she took in his grim face and the disarray of his supplies. "They found your cabin," she said. It wasn't a question. Jerry nodded, dismounting stiffly. Left a friendly note, too. He handed her the crumpled paper. Ada's fingers tightened on the message. "I warned you they would come. These men, they do not stop until they get what they want. What they want ain't rightfully theirs," Jerry said firmly. Ada's chin lifted. "No, it is not." She disappeared inside for a moment, returning with a worn leather Bible. Opening it carefully, she withdrew several folded papers. "See for yourself." Jerry smoothed the documents with reverent hands. The deed was properly drawn, signed, and notarized, naming Standing Bear Snowbird as legal owner of 160 acres, including the spring that fed the valley. Everything appeared legitimate. "Your husband earned this land square," Jerry said, returning the papers. "With honest work and fair payment," Ada agreed. "But that means nothing to men who see only profit." She held the Bible close. "These papers are all we have left of him, his dream for our son." Jerry glanced at the ransacked supplies. "We need to hide those better. Men like that won't hesitate to burn paper, Bible, and all." Ada nodded slowly. Moving to a large trunk near her bed, she opened it and showed Jerry a clever false bottom she'd created. The Bible and deeds slipped inside perfectly, invisible unless you knew where to look. As evening approached, Jerry built up the fire while Ada prepared a simple supper. Nathaniel sat propped in bed, wielding the piece of wood Jerry had given him. Soft humming filled the cabin, a Cherokee lullaby the boy remembered from younger days. The gentle melody wrapped around them like a warm blanket. Jerry settled into his spot by the hearth, watching firelight play across Ida's face as she worked. Nathaniel's humming blended with the crackle of burning wood, the quiet domestic sounds of spoon against pot, the whisper of wind outside. Something long forgotten stirred in his chest, a feeling of rightness, of belonging. For the first time since losing his family, Jerry felt the presence of home. Not just shelter from weather and wilderness, but true home. People to protect, a purpose to serve, a place worth fighting for. Looking at Ada and Nathaniel in the firelight, he knew with bone-deep certainty that he would defend them with his last breath. The railroad man's threat had only sealed what Jerry already knew in his heart. His fate was bound to Ada's now, for better or worse. They would face whatever came together. The days melted together like snowflakes on warm glass. Outside, winter tightened its grip on the mountain, but inside Ada's cabin, something else was growing, something that felt remarkably like hope. Jerry worked from sunrise to sunset, teaching his weathered hands new tasks. He packed fresh mud and straw between the cabin's logs, sealing out bitter drafts that had plagued Ada and Nathaniel. The work was steady, methodical, giving him time to appreciate how the morning light caught Ada's dark hair as she moved about her daily routines. "Here," Jerry said, showing Nathaniel how to mix the mud just right. Not too wet, not too dry, like good bread dough. The boy's thin fingers plunged into the earth, his face brightening with interest. Though still weak, Nathaniel had begun sitting, up longer each day, wrapped in blankets near the hearth while Jerry worked. Ada's herbal teas, strong with wildflower honey and pine needle essence, seemed to ease his breathing. Jerry's snares and hunting brought fresh meat daily: rabbit, grouse, even a young deer. Ada's eyes sparkled with approval as she prepared the game. Her skilled hands waste nothing. The smell of cooking meat and herbs filled the cabin, making it feel more like home with each passing day. One quiet afternoon, Jerry pulled out a smooth plank of wood he'd been saving. Using his knife, he carefully scratched a checkerboard pattern into its surface. He gathered small stones from beside the hearth, some dark, some light. "Ever played checkers, Nathaniel?" Jerry asked, setting up the pieces. The boy shook his head, eyes bright with curiosity. "Well then, let me teach you. It's a game of strategy, like planning a hunt or choosing where to plant crops." They sat cross-legged on Nathaniel's bed, the board between them. Jerry explained each move patiently, demonstrating with exaggerated gestures that made Nathaniel laugh. The sound of that laughter, clear and bright, seemed to warm the cabin more than any fire. Ada paused in her work, watching them. Something soft crossed her face, a look Jerry caught from the corner of his eye but didn't dare meet directly, afraid it might vanish like morning mist. The black stallion recovered steadily, its wound healing clean thanks to Ada's poultices and Jerry's care. One crisp afternoon, Jerry knelt beside the animal in the lean-to shelter they'd built. His rough hand stroked the stallion's gleaming neck as he whispered a prayer of thanks for the horse's recovery, for leading him to this hidden cabin, for giving him purpose again. He felt Ada's presence before he heard her approach. She knelt beside him in the straw, her shoulder brushing his. Without a word, she placed her hand on his shoulder, warm through his wool shirt. Together, they bowed their heads. "Great Spirit," Ada murmured in English, "we ask for healing for my son, for protection in these mountains, for wisdom to walk the path you've set before us." Jerry's voice caught in his throat, but he managed to whisper, "Amen." They stayed that way a moment longer, connected by touch and faith. The stallion nickered softly, as if adding its own prayer to theirs. That evening, after Nathaniel had drifted to sleep, Ada sat by the fire mending one of Jerry's shirts. The lamp cast golden light across her features as she began to sing. The words were Cherokee, but the tune was familiar, an old hymn Jerry recognized from his childhood church. Her voice was clear and sweet, lifting to the cabin's rafters. Though he couldn't understand the words, Jerry felt their meaning in his bones. Praise, gratitude, hope. The melody wrapped around him like a warm blanket, chasing away years of lonely silence. He watched her fingers move steadily with needle and thread, her voice carrying the ancient song. Something expanded in his chest, a feeling he'd thought long buried with Sarah and Thomas. Not replacing that love, but growing alongside it. Like new grass after winter, the wind moaned outside, rattling the newly reinforced walls. But inside, warmth radiated from more than just the crackling fire. It came from Nathaniel's peaceful breathing, from Ada's gentle song, from the simple knowledge that he was no longer alone. Jerry glanced around the cabin, at the checkerboard, still laid out on Nathaniel's bed, at Ada's herbs drying from the rafters, at his own boots beside the door, as if they belonged there. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a solitary man carrying his grief like a heavy stone. Now, somehow, he found himself part of something larger, something that felt remarkably like family. Ada's song faded to a soft hum, then silence. She looked up, meeting Jerry's gaze across the firelight. Neither spoke, but understanding passed between them, clear as mountain starlight. Whatever challenges lay ahead, They would face them together. Dawn painted the snow-laden peaks in pale gold when Jerry first heard the horses. He'd risen early to check the trap lines, but the distant thunder of hooves stopped him cold. 3 riders emerged from the morning mist, their shapes dark against the pristine white of new-fallen snow. His heart clenched. Leading the group was Deputy Frank Mallory, his badge catching the weak sunlight. Behind him rode 2 men. Jerry didn't recognize railroad men by their city clothes and hard eyes. "Ada!" Jerry hissed through the cabin door. "Company coming." "Yet. Yourself and Nathaniel up that loft ladder. Quick now." Ada's eyes went wide, but she moved with purpose, helping Nathaniel climb despite his weakness. Jerry heard them settle into the shadowy loft, just as boots crunched on the snow outside. "Open up." Deputy Mallory's voice boomed against the wooden door. "Official business." Jerry took his time responding, settling into the chair by the hearth, with his rifle laid casual-like across his knees. "Door's unlatched," he called out. The door burst open, letting in a blast of cold air and 3 scowling men. Deputy Mallory filled the doorframe, hand resting on his pistol. The railroad men flanked him, one tall and lean, the other squat with a face like spoiled meat. "Well, if it ain't the mountain hermit," Mallory sneered. "Seems you've been harboring a fugitive, Boone." "No fugitives here," Jerry said evenly. "Just me, enjoying my morning coffee." The tall railroad man stepped forward. "We know the Indian woman's here. Her and that sickly boy. They're trespassing on railroad property." "Mighty strange claim," Jerry replied, fingers tightening on his rifle. "Seeing as I ain't seen any railroad tracks within 20 miles of here." "The woman's husband stole certain documents," the squat man growled. "Company property. We're here to retrieve them and escort her to town for questioning." Jerry's voice turned to ice. "Seems to me a widow's got right to her husband's legal property, especially when he paid for it with honest work and his life." "Law's the law," Deputy Mallory declared, taking another step forward. "Now where is she?" "Just me here," Jerry repeated. His rifle barrel lifted slightly, not quite, pointing at them, but the threat clear enough. "And I reckon you boys best ride out while the riding's good." The deputy's face darkened. "You threatening an officer of the law, Boone?" "Not threatening anyone." Jerry's voice remained steady. "Just stating facts. This here's private property, and you've got no warrant, I can see." A tense silence filled the cabin. Jerry could hear soft breathing from the loft, could feel Ada's fear like a physical thing. But he kept his eyes locked on the intruders, daring them to make a move. Finally, Deputy Mallory spat on the floor. "We'll be back with papers and more. Men, count on it." He jerked his head at his companions. "Let's ride." Jerry followed them out, rifle ready, watching until they disappeared into the trees. But something caught his eye, smoke rising in the distance, thick and black against the morning sky. His gut twisted as he realized where it was coming from. His cabin. His home for the past 15 years. Jerry's hand shook as he helped Ada and Nathaniel down from the loft. Through the window, they watched the smoke climb higher. "Those devils," Ada whispered, her face tight with anger and guilt. "They're burning everything you have." Jerry's throat ached as he thought of Sarah's quilt, carefully preserved all these years. Thomas's tiny boots he'd never had the heart to give away. The family Bible with births and deaths marked in fading ink. All of it feeding some stranger's vengeful fire. "Just things," he managed to say, though his voice cracked. "Just wood and cloth." But Ada saw through him. She gripped his arm, her touch steady and warm. "You should go. They'll destroy everything you have left if you stay. This isn't your fight." Jerry turned to her, seeing the fear in her eyes, not for herself, but for him. Nathaniel stood beside, his mother pale but straight-backed, trying to be brave. The boy still clutched the wooden horse Jerry had carved him. Jerry covered Ada's hand with his own, rough fingers closing over her smaller ones. "I'm exactly where I need to be," he said, firmly. "They can burn every stick and board I own, but they won't run me off. Not from you, not from Nathaniel." "Jerry." Ada's voice was soft, uncertain. "No." He squeezed her hand. "I made my choice when that stallion led me here. I'm not leaving either of you to face this alone." Nathaniel stepped closer, pressing against. Jerry sighed. After a moment's hesitation, Ada's head bowed in acceptance, her fingers tightening around Jerry's. Outside, the smoke from Jerry's burning cabin rose like a signal fire against the winter sky. But inside, 3 hearts beat stronger together, bound by something deeper than fear or duty, bound by love, by faith, and by the fierce determination to stand as one against whatever storms might come. Acrid smoke drifted through the valley, like a ghostly shroud, carrying with it the ash of Jerry's memories. But worse than the loss of his possessions was the sound that filled the cabin that evening, Nathaniel's racking cough, deeper and more violent than before. "The smoke," Ada whispered, pressing a damp cloth to her son's forehead. "It's making him worse." Jerry watched helplessly as Nathaniel struggled for breath, his thin chest heaving beneath the quilts. The boy's skin burned like hot iron beneath Jerry's weathered palm. Even in the dim lamplight, Jerry could see the fear in Ada's eyes as she measured herbs with trembling hands. Night crept in, bringing with it a bone-deep cold that no fire seemed able to chase away. Nathaniel tossed in his fevered dreams, calling out in Cherokee words Jerry couldn't understand. Ada's shoulders shook as she tried to coax water between her son's cracked lips. "I'm so sorry, Jerry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You're home. Everything you had. All because of us." "Don't," Jerry said firmly, dipping a fresh cloth in cool water. "None of this is your doing." But Ada's tears fell faster. "If we hadn't been here, if you hadn't found us," she pressed her hands to her face, "God is punishing us. Punishing me for bringing this trouble to your door." Jerry knelt beside her chair, his joints creaking in protest. "Now you listen here," he said, gentle but firm. "I lost my home once before when Sarah and Thomas died. Thought God had abandoned me then, too." He paused, the old grief catching in his throat. "Nearly destroyed myself, wallowing in that bitterness. Spent 15 years hiding from life itself until that stallion led me here." Ada lifted her tear-stained face. In the lamplight, Jerry could see every line of worry etched around her eyes, every fear that haunted her. "I was angry at God for so long," Jerry continued, his voice rough with memory. "Blamed him for taking my family. Couldn't see past my own pain to realize he had a purpose, even in suffering." He reached out carefully, taking Ada's cold hands in his. "But look at us now. Here we are, brought together when we needed each. Othermost, that ain't punishment, Ada. That's providence." Nathaniel's breathing grew more labored, each breath a desperate fight. Ada's fingers tightened around Jerry's. "I'm scared," she whispered. "He's all I have left." "Then let's pray," Jerry said softly. "Together, like you taught me." Ada hesitated, then slowly nodded. They knelt beside Nathaniel's bed, their clasped hands resting on the rough wool blanket. Jerry's voice was low and steady as he began. "Lord, we come to you now, not in bitterness but in trust. We've lost much, but you've given us each other. We ask for your healing touch on this boy, not because we deserve it, but because you are merciful." Ada's tears fell onto their joined hands as she added her own prayer in Cherokee, her words flowing like water over stones. Jerry didn't need to understand the words to feel their power, their desperate hope. Outside, the night wind carried the last traces of smoke from Jerry's burning cabin, but it carried something else to a strong, clear whinny from the stallion in the lean-to. The sound rang through the darkness like a bell, full of life and defiance. Jerry's head lifted. The horse that had led him here, that had survived its own wounds, now called out as if in answer to their prayers. He remembered how close to death it had been, how it had fought its way back to strength. "Ada," he said urgently, "we can't wait any longer. Nathaniel needs more help than we can give. Him here. Him here." She looked up, fear and hope warring in her eyes. "The town doctor won't treat Indians," she said bitterly. "You know that. Then we'll find someone who will." Jerry stood, his decision made. "There's a mission station 2 days' ride from here. They help everyone, no questions asked." He gripped her shoulders gently. "We have to try, Ada, before it's too late." Nathaniel stirred restlessly, his breath whistling in his chest. Ada stroked his hot forehead, and Jerry saw the moment when her mother's fierce love overcame her fear. "Yes," she whispered. "For my son, I'll risk anything." The stallion called out again, stronger this time. Jerry smiled faintly, recognizing God's hand even in this. "That horse didn't lead me here by chance," he said softly. "And it didn't heal just to watch us give up now." Ada's tears had stopped. In their place, Jerry saw a glimmer of the same determination that had kept her fighting all these years. Together, they began to plan their journey, while outside, the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, bearing silent witness to the power of renewed faith and the strength of hearts united in love and prayer. Dawn painted the snow-covered mountains in shades of rose and gold as Jerry led the black stallion from its makeshift shelter. The horse's coat gleamed with renewed health, its injured leg now bearing weight without hesitation. Jerry ran his hand along its muscled neck, remembering how close to death it had been just weeks ago. "Like you," he murmured to the horse, "we've got to show our strength today." Inside the cabin, Ada wrapped Nathaniel in every blanket they could spare. The boy's fever had dropped slightly, but his breathing remained shallow and labored. Jerry watched her tuck the edges with careful precision, her movements betraying both love and fear. "The deed papers," Jerry said quietly. "We need them now." Ada's hand stilled. She crossed to the trunk and lifted its false bottom, retrieving the Bible that held their future within its pages. Her fingers trembled as she touched the worn leather cover. "The law won't care about our claim," she whispered. "They never have." Jerry stepped closer, his voice firm but gentle. "Truth's like water, Ada. It finds its way out, no matter how folks try to dam it up. Your husband earned this land honest, and that truth needs telling." She met his eyes, searching for any doubt, any weakness. Finding none, she nodded slowly and tucked the Bible securely into her shawl. Together, they helped Nathaniel onto the stallion's broad back, padding the saddle with extra blankets. The boy tried to sit straight, but weakness bent his shoulders. Jerry secured him carefully, making certain he couldn't fall. "I ain't scared," Nathaniel insisted, though his voice quavered. Jerry squeezed his knee. "Course you ain't. You're stronger than most grown men I know." The morning air bit sharp as broken glass as they set out, Jerry leading the stallion while Ada walked close beside her son. Their boots crunched through crusted snow, the only sound besides Nathaniel's occasional coughing. The frozen trail wound, down through stands of pine and bare-branched oak, each step taking them further from the safety of their hidden valley. Hours passed. The sun climbed high, then began its slow descent. Jerry kept their pace steady but gentle, mindful of Nathaniel's condition. When they stopped to rest, Ada offered her son sips of water and spoonfuls of honey to ease his throat. "Tell me about the town," Nathaniel whispered during one such break. "Is it big?" Jerry smiled, settling beside him. "Not so very big. Maybe 50 buildings all told. Got a general store with candy sticks in glass jars, a proper church with a bell tower, even a small schoolhouse." The boy's eyes brightened at these simple wonders, and Jerry's heart ached. How long had this child lived in hiding, denied even the most basic pleasures of civilization? They resumed their journey as afternoon shadows lengthened. The trail grew wider, more traveled, and Ada's steps became hesitant. Jerry noticed how she pulled her shawl closer, as if trying to make herself smaller. "Hold your head high," he told her softly. "You've nothing to be ashamed of." She glanced at him, her dark eyes full of memories. "Last time I walked these streets, a woman spat at my feet, called me savage." "That ain't happening today," Jerry said, his jaw set. "Not while I'm beside you." The sun was setting when they finally caught sight of the town below. Yellow lamplight glowed in windows, smoke rose from chimneys, and the church bell tolled the evening hour. To Jerry, who had avoided the place for years, it looked both familiar and strange. Ada stopped dead in her tracks. "I can't," she whispered. "They'll laugh. They'll say I'm nothing but an Indian woman who doesn't know her place." Jerry turned to face her fully. In the fading light, he could see how fear made her tremble, how years of prejudice had worn deep grooves in her spirit. But he could also see the strength that had kept her fighting all this time. "Listen to me, Ada Snowbird," he said, gripping her shoulder gently but firmly. "You are a mother protecting her son, a widow defending her rightful home. And I swear before God and man, I will stand as your witness. Your voice will be heard." Nathaniel reached down from the stallion's back, touching his mother's cheek. "We can do this, Mama, together." Ada caught her son's hand, pressed it to her heart. Then she straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. In that moment, Jerry saw in her face the same proud determination that had first caught his attention in her doorway, shotgun in hand. Together, she agreed and took the first step down toward the waiting town. The last rays of sunlight faded behind the mountains as Jerry, Ada, and Nathaniel entered the town's main street. Lanterns cast pools of yellow light across packed snow, and smoke curled from brick chimneys into the darkening sky. The clip-clop of the stallion's hooves drew faces to windows and brought folk out onto wooden sidewalks. "Wow, look what the..." Wind blew in. Deputy Mallory's voice rang out, sharp with mockery. He stood outside the sheriff's office, thumbs hooked in his gumbelt. "If it ain't the squatter woman and that mountain hermit." Jerry's hand tightened on the stallion's lead rope. More townspeople gathered, forming a loose circle in the street. Women pulled children closer. Men whispered behind raised hands. Ada held her head high, though Jerry could see how she trembled. "That's far enough," Mallory said, stepping forward. "This Indian woman's got no business here after dark." Jerry's voice cut through the evening air like a steel blade. "Mrs. Snowbird has every right to be here. More right than some who wear a badge they don't deserve." A collective intake of breath swept through the crowd. Mallory's face reddened. "You watch your mouth, Boone, or maybe you'd like to spend a night in my jail." "What I'd like," Jerry said, each word measured and clear, "is for good folks to witness truth." He turned to address the gathering crowd directly. "This woman holds legal deed to her land. Her husband earned it with honest work, paid for it with honest money." Ada withdrew the Bible from her shawl, hand steady now as she opened it to reveal the carefully preserved papers. Nathaniel sat straighter in the saddle, pride shining through his weakness. "Lies," Mallory spat. "Everyone knows Indians can't hold title to. That's quite enough, Frank." The deep voice rolled like distant thunder as Judge Thomas Whitaker emerged from the gathering. His white beard caught lamplight as he moved forward, commanding respect. With each step, "Let me see those papers, Mrs. Snowbird." Ada extended the documents. The crowd held its breath as the judge adjusted his spectacles, examining each page with careful attention. Jerry noticed Railroad Agent Griggs lurking at the edge of the crowd, his face a mask of barely contained fury. "I remember James Snowbird." "Well, Judge Whittaker said at last, his voice carrying to every ear. Worked harder than 3 men put together. Saved 6 lives when that mine shaft collapsed 3 years back, including my own grandson's. Murmurs rippled through the gathering. Old-timers nodded, recalling the incident. These papers, the judge continued, holding them up, are properly signed, witnessed, and recorded. The land claim is valid under territorial law. He fixed Mallory with a stern gaze. You do well to remember your duty is to uphold justice. Deputy, not serve railroad money. Someone in the crowd called out, Judge is right. James Snowbird was a good man, and his widow's got as much right to that land as any. Another voice added. The tide of sentiment turned like a river changing course. Where there had been suspicious stares, now came looks of sympathy and support. Several women stepped forward to help Ada steady Nathaniel, who had begun to sway with fatigue. Griggs pushed through the crowd, his smooth manner cracking. Now see here, Judge, the railroad has plans for that valley. We're prepared to offer. The railroad, Judge Whittaker interrupted, can find another route. This deed stands. He handed the papers back to Ada with a gentle smile. God rest James's. So, ma'am, he'd be proud to see you defending his legacy. Tears spilled down Ada's cheeks as she clutched the documents to her heart. Deputy Mallory backed away, tugging nervously at his collar. Griggs glared at Jerry, hatred plain on his face, but even he could read the mood of the town. With a curt nod to his men, he turned and stalked away toward the saloon. The tension broke like ice in spring thaw. Townspeople pressed forward with offers of help blankets for Nathaniel, hot soup from the hotel kitchen, a proper doctor to check his cough. Through it all, Ada kept hold of Jerry's rough hand, her grip fierce with gratitude and something deeper. That made his heart swell. Thank you, she whispered, her eyes shining in the lamplight, for believing in us, for standing beside us. Jerry squeezed her hand gently, feeling the walls around his own heart crumbling like old stone. Reckon that's where I belong, he said softly. If you'll have me. Around them, the town bustled with newfound purpose, helping to make room at the hotel for the night. But for Jerry and Ada, the world had narrowed to just this moment, this touch, this shared victory that promised something more precious than land or water rights. The chance to build a future together. The town's warmth continued to flow as neighbors brought forward offerings. Mrs. Baker from the general store pressed a cloth-wrapped loaf of fresh bread into Ada's hands. The blacksmith's wife arrived with a basket of preserved fruits and dried meat. Even the tavern keeper contributed hot soup in ceramic jars, wrapped carefully to stay warm. Reverend Mitchell stepped through the crowd, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. We would be honored if you'd join us at the church, he said, gesturing to the white steeple building down the street, to give thanks for young Nathaniel's preservation through this trial. Inside the church, lamplight gleamed on simple wooden pews. Nathaniel sat between Ada and Jerry, wrapped in a borrowed quilt. The preacher's words of gratitude echoed off bare walls, speaking of God's guidance through darkness and the strength found in unity. Jerry bowed his head, feeling peace settle in his heart like gentle snow. As night deepened, they began the journey home. 2 borrowed lanterns swung from the Stallion's saddle, casting golden paths through the darkness. Jerry led the horse carefully, Ada walking close beside him. The valley welcomed them with familiar shadows and the soft whisper of wind through pines. They passed the blackened ruins of Jerry's cabin, barely visible in the darkness. Smoke still rose faintly from the ashes, but Jerry felt no sting of loss. His gaze turned instead to Ada's cabin ahead, its windows dark but promising shelter. Inside, Jerry built up the fire while Ada settled Nathaniel into bed. The boy's breathing came easier now, his fever finally broken. As Jerry tucked an extra blanket around his shoulders, Nathaniel's eyes fluttered open. "Thank you, Uncle Jerry," he whispered, the words barely audible but filling the cabin with warmth. Jerry's throat tightened as he smoothed the boy's hair. "Rest easy, son," he murmured. When he turned, Ada stood watching, tears tracking silently down her cheeks. The fierce walls she had built around her heart lay in ruins, swept away by Jerry's unwavering faith in her. "You didn't just protect us," she said softly. "You made me believe I was worth protecting, that my claim to this land to a future was just as real as any others." Jerry stepped closer, his rough hands gentle as they caught her tears. In the firelight, surrounded by the home they would rebuild together, 3 lonely hearts finally found their peace. Spring arrived with gentle breezes and melting snow, transforming the valley into a tapestry of new green life. Morning sunlight spilled across the freshly rebuilt cabin, its sturdy logs and tight-chinked walls standing proud against the blue sky. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, carrying the scent of pine and promise. Jerry, Ada, and Nathaniel stood in the dooryard, taking in their shared handiwork. The stallion that had brought them together grazed peacefully in the meadow, its black coat gleaming with health. No trace remained of the wound that had once driven it through deep snow to their door. "Look there," Jerry pointed as Tom Baker's wagon appeared on the trail. Their neighbors visited more often now, bringing eggs to trade or simply stopping to share news. The isolation that had once gripped this hidden valley had melted away like winter frost. Jerry hefted his axe, moving to the chopping block where split logs lay scattered. His muscles had grown strong again with honest work and purpose. Nearby, Nathaniel carried water buckets from the spring, his steps sure and steady. The boy's cough had eased with the warming weather, and color bloomed in his cheeks like the wild roses climbing the cabin walls dot in her garden. Ada worked among young plants, her hands gentle in the dark soil. She paused to wave as Jerry wiped sweat from his forehead, their eyes meeting in a glance that held volumes of unspoken gratitude dot as evening settled over the valley. They gathered around the table, where a lamp cast warm light on their faces. Jerry bowed his head, something he hadn't done at his own table for more than 20 years. "Lord," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "thank you for this food, this home, and most of all for this family you've given me. Thank you for leading that injured stallion to show me the way when I was lost in more than just snow." "Amen," Ada and Nathaniel answered softly. Jerry looked at them both, his heart full. He remembered the bitter man who had followed a wounded horse through winter storms, seeking only to end its suffering. Instead, God had given him a second chance at life and love, a family formed in hardship and strengthened by faith. He smiled, words of thanks filling his heart where silence had dwelt for so long. If this story made you pause, reflect, or even smile, don't forget to subscribe. I post daily, and the next story might be exactly what you need to hear.